I'm Yves Bolognini. I come from Lausanne. I'm the director of the Bolo Museum, and you're listening to the Scene World podcast.
It's the Scene World podcast. My name is AJ. That is Joerg over there. How are you doing?
Hello,
today?
I'm very happy to be here today.
I think we should just do the entire intro like this.
I'm not sure people will listen to that in this.
In a minute, we're talking with Leland, who is the development administrative assistant for the MADE Museum the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, which was located in California and now is kind of floating. But we're going to learn all about that in a minute. Before that, we have a tiny little bit of news, not very much.
Yeah.
So I will let you start, my man.
Yeah. December 8th, the Terrican Flashback retail version for the PS4 and Switch will be out.
Cool.
And you can pre-order it now at Amazon, for example. But I got myself the limited edition. We mentioned it 2 podcasts ago in our news section. And it's up again for the 4th time. That's making me thinking how much limited it is. For real, you know?
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly seeing, like, pre-order now, a limited edition on Facebook. And in between, they took it down from the homepage, and they put it back up. Which makes me wonder, didn't it sell well? Or
they made more?
Or they made more.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other news is that the Foremost and Only Museum has a limited edition t-shirt at Spreadshirt. And
cool.
It can be bought until November 25th. And it's supposed to rescue the museum.
Okay.
In case this pandemic takes a bit longer.
Nice. We'll put links to all that down there so you can see it. And maybe,
Yep.
I think, are you doing the editing for this? You're doing the editing for this one, right? No? Yes?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It's up to us.
Okay. Then, yes. Wait, what?
I don't know.
When are we? Oh, okay. We'll figure that out. Okay, I've got a small bit of news. Is that what you got?
That's all I got.
Okay, I have one. Retro Games Limited, who are the people that made the C64 and the VIC-20 and all that stuff there. They have announced
the American Maxi.
No, they have not announced American Maxi. That would be nice if they did, but no, they
Well,
have...
actually, I read online that they are now producing it.
Oh, okay.
The American version of the C64 Maxi.
Okay. Well, they have announced the C64 Winter Game Development Competition. They have announced the C64 Winter Game Development Competition 2020.
That too.
Yes. So they are. So the first place. So it's a game development competition. They're looking for the best game for the C64 and or the VIC-20. First place the award is the C64 with the joystick. Second place gets the Mini and the joystick, and I guess third place gets nothing. Games can be submitted through email or using stuff like Google Drive or other file sharing websites, and it runs now until the deadline for it is December 11th, 2020. So if you've got a game that you're working on, maybe finish that up quick and get it submitted. We'll put a link to where you can check out information about that right down there and
nice
do all that jazz.
Okay.
Yes. That's all the news I have. That's all the news he has. So let's go
to them
and talk about the MADE. So we're sitting here today with Leland. They are the development director and, the development director for the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, the MADE. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well,
Absolutely.
thanks a lot for joining.
Hmm. Now we've touched on the MADE a couple of times because we've had Steve Sullivan and Randy Farmer who do the Neo Habitat project, which is sponsored by the MADE.
Right.
But to date, we have not actually ventured into the MADE itself, the actual museum, and that is where you come in. So, again, welcome. That's my
Thank
train of
you.
thought ends there.
Yeah. Well, originally we discussed about it, and when we said like, okay, let's wait till they found a new place to be, and then
That-
I unfortunately saw the bad news
Yeah.
retweeted by Randy Farmer. So maybe you want to tell us a bit about what the situation is
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah, it's a little messy. Basically, we always knew that we were going to have to move sometime in the near future. Our lease was going to be up next May, so that was always on our mind. But then there was a pandemic, if you haven't noticed.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we shut down back in March. And that has been really difficult for us because we make 80% of our money just through admission to the museum, just through people walking in the door.
Mhm.
And so without people being able to walk through the door, it's been really tough for us. And our landlord was acting as landlords often do and was very unwilling to work with us. And so we basically found out in August that we would have to be out within a month or two.
Wow.
So then it was just a really, really quick scramble to find somewhere to put our stuff because we have a lot of it. We have over 12,000 games. We have 40 different systems and just so much stuff. And so we luckily were able to find a storage space still in Oakland, California, where our museum was located, actually basically within walking distance. And about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we moved our entire collection into storage. And we're planning on having to be there for about 2 years. That's the maximum amount of time we can really be in storage. And so we're going to be using that time to hopefully raise money in order to open up a new location and have a new space. And the reason that we're doing it this way rather than really rushing into a new space is because we don't want a haphazard, not very good video game museum. We want to use the time to plan and to raise enough money to make like the video game museum of our dreams.
Yeah. So now, the move actually, so this was something that while it happened kind of abruptly, you sort of saw coming.
Right. Yeah. We knew we were going to have to move eventually.
Okay. Yeah. Because when I saw, I'm on the Slack channel for it, and somebody posted, we just lost the building. We got to be out in a month, and it was like, oh my God, that's
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we thought that by May we'd be able to renegotiate our lease or maybe like find a new space. And then all of a sudden it was, no, you have to be out now. The building's getting sold, basically. They were very unwilling to work with us. And so it ended up being much more last minute than we thought it would be.
Right.
Wow. But that surprises me because, I mean, you are a museum. You would think that the landlord or something has an empathy about what you are doing
Landlords
there.
are landlords, man. It's
Right.
it's money, and that's about all it is. And especially in the United States, in the U.S. here, there's no protection for tenants. It's
Right,
ridiculous.
yeah.
Okay. For one, here in Germany, you have protection for 3 months, but the problem is, of course, that you have to pay it afterwards. So
Yeah.
you still have the problem that you don't have the money when you have to pay it again.
Right.
But still, I mean, I spoke to other people with museums in other countries, and their landlord was like, "Yeah, you can skip a rent or two. That's totally not a problem." So I see in America it's more radical, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And at first it was kind of all right, but the landlord would eventually want us to, like you said, like pay all the money back, and like we just don't have that money. If we're not paying it this month, we wouldn't be able to pay it next month, you know? So luckily, our new storage space is really great, and we got a really good deal on. So we're not worried about being able to pay rent there. Especially with all the support we've gotten lately, which I'm sure I'll get into. But so it's a better situation for us now because we're not having to worry about being kicked out. But it was very, very sudden.
And normally when we have our guests, we ask how they got into the situation they are right now. So I would ask you too, how did you actually get involved with the MADE in the first place?
Yeah, so I was back in, I think, December, maybe January. I was still in school, still in college, and I was just kind of looking through job boards, and my undergrad degree is in art history and museum studies. So I'm coming from this from a museum background and not from a video game background, which I think is probably different than everyone I work with at the MADE and probably everyone you have on the podcast. So I was just looking for jobs to get out of college, and I happened upon just a posting for the MADE, and I had never heard of them, but I was like, okay, I feel like I can do this. I like video games. I'm not very good at video games, but I do really like them. And so I applied, and over kind of a long process, I got this job, and I started in February, which was literally right before everything shut down, which is a really terrible time to start a job at a museum.
Yes, it is.
But obviously they are fine with you, otherwise you would have feared to be kicked off or something. I mean, that would be my first thought, you know. Oh, there's a pandemic and I'm the new guy here or new girl or whatever. And I'm like, wow, now will they keep me or not? I mean, now you're even on podcasts and stuff and show your face, and you are kind of the PR person now.
Yeah, I was definitely really scared, and especially because I'm currently the only paid employee of the MADE. It's just me getting paid. So because the organization has always worked in this kind of like reverse structure of usually museums, the person at the top, the executive director, makes a ridiculous amount of money, and then they make people do all the actual hard work for nothing. And our museum has always had that reverse structure. So our founder and executive director and my boss, Alex Handy, he doesn't make any money. He's never made a dime from the MADE. He chose to do that way on purpose. It's always been the people like at the front desk and the people cleaning and like me who is actually paid, not the people at the top. And I think that's a really lovely way to run an organization, and kind of like speaks to the ways in which this organization is really a labor of love and always has been. And I'm very grateful to still have my job, but it was never like, I don't think it ever crossed their mind to let me go, which is really, really sweet. And I really appreciate. I've just been kind of slowly taking on more jobs as I've been here. So I started off just doing a few specific things, and now I end up doing a lot more PR stuff, a lot more social media. And that was also like Alex's wish, is that he's always the person who is the face of the organization. And with me coming in, he was like, I want it to not just be me. I want other people to be able to speak up about the organization too.
Yeah, I mean, at least what most people don't see is the work behind such a thing, and right. There's always more than one person that makes this thing completely and working, at least. And
right.
Interestingly, at the beginning, you made the point that you're actually planning to stocking the collection for 2 years. So even if you find a new place to rent earlier, you wouldn't move in instantly.
It depends. If we were to be able to find the perfect place for very cheap tomorrow, we would we might move in. We might start moving in. I think until we are in a position where, with the pandemic, where the kind of the government and the CDC is saying that it's safe for our museum to reopen, then we'll probably would look into going ahead. Right now, here in our area, museums are allowed to reopen, but they have so many restrictions that it just wouldn't work for a museum because it's a very high-touch museum. You know, all of our exhibits are interactive. You can walk in and you can play any game that's ever been created, basically. And obviously that involves touching things, and touching things during a pandemic is not a good idea. So it's a lot harder than like an art museum, a traditional art museum opening. We would just not, you know, to us, there's no point if you can't play the games, and it's not safe to play the games right now.
Right.
Well, I mean, we interviewed before a couple of years ago the Foremost Only Museum here in Germany, and they actually chose the solution of a combined mask and clothes requirement because they also are interactive and rather than not opening.
Where was this?
Clothes
No,
and
where,
masks.
No, where?
For Muslim only.
Okay.
Yeah. In Seligenstadt near Frankfurt. So they have the same problem because they are an arcade and pinball museum, and you need to touch the devices to play them. And they said like, okay, we will require clothes as a workaround. But well, I mean, of course, it's not a solution for every museum, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we just didn't feel like safe about it at this point. And right now it's obviously moot because we're in storage, but we are kind of like open to different solutions and some sort of in between. It's something that we really don't know right now because, you know, all of our energy has and still is just, you know, helping survive and making sure our collection is safe, like in our storage area, and that we're really able to preserve everything and it's not going to, you know, get damaged while it's in storage. So that's kind of been our first priority. And then we're going to think about what we're going to do going forward with our physical things.
Can we talk a bit about the history of the museum? I would like to know when it was created and how was the connection with NeoHabitat?
Yeah, so I'm not great at remembering what years everything was, so definitely fact check me. I know that we have had our like current, well, our now previous location since 2010, but before that they're in a different location. I think like 2006 was when the museum was founded. These are things I should know. But the museum kind of had a little bit of a rocky start, and Alex always likes to say that like these last 10 years especially, but the entire time the museum has existed has been like an experiment in creating a video game museum. NeoHabitat was, I do not know the year off the top of my head, but that was a project that a lot of people view as being kind of like a side thing to the museum or not really involved in the rest of the museum, but I think it has a lot of like direct connections with what we do on a daily basis. Yeah. So like if you look up copyright law about video games, like if you look at the super boring technical copyright law stuff, they mention the MADE, and they mention it because of our normal collection and like what we're doing and playing the games every day. And they also, that stuff matters because of NeoHabitat. And it's talking about the same thing, which is access to video games. Yes. And access to video games that people can't necessarily play. So like you could come into the museum and like play any Commodore 64 game you want, because who owns one these days? So, but you could also play Habitat or NeoHabitat, I guess, like on your browser. Yeah. And like that access, being able to do both of those things is so important. And I think that like NeoHabitat is, you know, part of the fundamental ideas behind the museum and part of our mission, because it talks about that same thing, is video game preservation looks like a lot of different things. It could look like, you know, having a perfectly clean and pristine system that you can go play a game on, or it could look like playing that game in your browser. And like both of those are really valid and really worthwhile to us. And that's why like, you know, Neo Habitat is a project that we care about so much, and that we actually end up being known for that, like internationally, almost sometimes more than for the museum itself. Like we'll get emails from people and be like, oh, like, yeah, you're the Habitat people. And like we're like, oh, it's weird that you know us as the Habitat people rather than the video game museum people. But, you know, both those things are really important.
Well, I guess that has to do with Wendy Farmer mentioning you a lot.
Well,
where
also,
he goes.
you know, like you know, when we talked to Randy, you know, it had a big impact on copyright law. You know,
Right.
it set precedent for a lot of stuff, and the museum is then directly responsible with that. You know.
Yeah, and there's like I view it as an absolute win. And copyright law is something which we all know pretty much always favors the big company and their profits.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument against us and against being able to do things like Neo Habitat or being able to you know, run our like modded console so you could play any game. The argument against that is like, oh, well, that'll take away profits from the big video game companies,
Yeah.
which is absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody is not, you know, spending money on a, you know, WoW subscription or something like that because they're playing Neo Habitat. Like those are not equal to each other. And so
Yeah.
it seems very silly. But that's the way the copyright law generally works. And so, you know, it's the fact that we're able to do this and be able to say like, no, there is a purpose and this is, you need to look at more than just profits, you know, is a really positive thing, I think, for copyright law outside of just small examples like Neo Habitat, like the MADE.
Well, I mean, over those 20 years we are doing the Sceneville thing right now, we have also figured it depends on the company, you know? I mean, we tried many times to talk to Nintendo about their NES Classical Mini, SNX Classical Mini, and I also got the answer like, no, we will never talk about the past or retro, you know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then when Sonic Mania was released, I made inquiry to Sega, and then we got Fabian Mario Döhler, who is called Mr. Sega because he is working for Sega for so long. And they were saying like, of course we will talk to you and
Right.
talk about Sonic Mania from the retro perspective, how it all began and why we decided to support a fan project and make the fan project a commercial project and release that as a new official part of Sonic. While when somebody converted Super Mario Bros. To the 64, Nintendo was stopping him. So you can see.
Well, I heard that was overblown. I heard that was kind of didn't actually happen.
I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, this typical example, Sega and Nintendo, you can see the
Right.
totally different approach from this viewpoint of history. You know,
Right.
we will make money from it, but we will not talk about the past.
Yeah, and we have like partnered with Sega before. Like they've always had a close relationship with us. Like Ubisoft as well has always like really respected what we're doing and supported us. But like, yeah, we could also never get someone like, you know, a partnership with Nintendo or like get Nintendo to, you know, give us money. Like that's and that would help a lot, you know, like a lot of big museums, like they are there because of big donors and corporate sponsorships and things, but it's really hard to get big video game companies to care about preserving their own history, which is mind-boggling to me as like a historian in general, and someone who obviously sees up close how important this is. It's really, really wild to me that these game companies seem to not view that as something worth preserving.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you kind of made of the same the same experience we had from a different perspective. And for you as a museum, it's even more important to have this cooperation in a way. I mean, for us, if they don't talk to us, well, not so much is lost, maybe some stories. But for you, you are preserving the software, the hardware, the machines, and that's the thing. And I mean, if you look at arcades nowadays in South America or something, they are mostly MAME machines running on a PC.
Yeah.
There's not really the real hardware anymore.
Yeah, and that's something which I think as time goes on, it's going to be even, I think it's going to happen much more quickly, this inability to run classic games on their hardware. Even now, like, even things like getting the correct chords to hook things up is getting harder and harder. Like, we currently have I think only one like chord for the Dreamcast. Like, we only have one, even though we have probably like 8 Dreamcasts that work. We can only hook one of them up to a TV, and like we could get more, but like it's getting harder and harder. And we do have like 30 CRTs, but CRTs are a perfect example that just 5 or 10 years ago people were chucking them out. And they were ending up in landfills, and they were getting stripped for parts and everything. And now they're getting harder to find. And so in probably 5 or 10 years, it's going to be really hard just to get a CRT. Yeah.
But I have to say, there is where the pandemic played nice to me, because in August, my CRT TV broke. And the first company I phoned to in the yellow pages, they were actually taking my order, because those small repair stores,
right,
small selling stores, they are happy for any order right now you give to them,
right,
even if it's for an old CRT TV.
Mm-hmm.
They will take any task right now. So though this is like the positive side of the negative pandemic, that now it was for me pretty easy to find a store that's like, okay, is really this machine with those old tubes? And like, yeah, that's why it's called CRT, because the old ray tube. That's why. Of course, the woman on the front desk, he was laughing at me on the phone. She couldn't believe it that I wanted a 25 years old TV repaired. What for? And I said, like, light guns.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure, okay, that's a point.
Yeah, and there's something really tactile and about playing a game on a CRT versus playing it emulated on on anything else, is like that kind of like click and that buzz when it first comes on, and like that sort of sound and that feeling is so unique, and that's nostalgia and everything, but it's something that like feels warm in a way that you don't get that experience with an emulated game.
But I also learned that people who are 25 years younger than me, 20 some I mean like 15 years younger than me, like in their early 20s, they really don't care so much about history and how this all started and all technology. And so maybe when AJ and I, when we are not around anymore, nobody will care about those
Excuse
CRTs.
me, when we're not around anymore, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 22, so and I pretty clearly care about this stuff. So I think it's not all young people, but I think that you're going to find nerds who care about old video games and about preservation all the time. And also something that is so great about nerds getting older is that some of them have kids and pass this on to their kids. And something that we see in the museum all the time when the museum was open is you'd have a parent bringing in their kid to the museum, and the first thing that they do is they want to show their child like the games that they played when they were a little kid. And so it's like, oh, come see my favorite game from when I was a kid. And like that's pretty much the first thing that happens. Or even when a parent is just like bringing their kids in and they're not really interested in the museum, they'll kind of wander over and they'll gravitate to the console that they had when they were a kid or the arcade game they played when they were a kid, and they'll like call their kids over and be like, hey, look at this, let me show you this thing from my childhood. You know, even people who don't have that interest in the preservation and everything can still kind of use that to connect across generations. And that's something that's so beautiful and I think so unique about a video game museum, is that ability to, you know, have that firsthand experience with the game. And, you know, something is going to be much more interesting if it's introduced with love. So that's something that happens all the time at the museum and gives me a lot of hope for the future and for hopefully the future of video game preservation.
Interesting. Yeah, nice to hear your perspective. You know? Yeah. Normally we are the younger guys in those interviews.
I do feel like anytime I'm like in this kind of world or talking to the people at the MADE, I do feel like a child. I feel very young.
It's interesting. So even though you started this interview saying like, I'm not really a tech person and not really into video games, you kind of grew to the topic.
Yeah, I think anytime I talk to someone at the MADE, I feel like I know nothing about video games because they're all so knowledgeable. And you know, that's something that amazes me every day, is just like the wealth of knowledge that's part of like our team and our community. And I feel like I don't know anything about that, but I've learned so much about video games just from having been at the museum for like 8 or 9 months now. I have learned so much about video games and about classic games and game preservation and like all this stuff that was not, you know, that was before I was born or like not even really part of my childhood, because like I didn't grow up playing video games. So it's interesting. What?
You didn't have any.
No, the first console that my family owned was the Wii. Like
Wow.
And that was like my friends had GameCubes. Like that was my generation. My friends all had GameCubes and I would like go to their house and like play Animal Crossing or like Wind Waker with them, and I loved that, but we never had anything. And like my friends had like DS's, and so I'm kind of like that generation. But we like bought a Wii just like every other family in America, and that was like the first console I owned. We played like, you know, like PC games. Like I played The Sims 2 a lot growing up, like things like that, but I was never really into video games as a kid. I never really had the opportunity to play them that much. And so that's definitely something that I've gotten into much more as an adult. And I think as a result, like I'm really bad at video games. Like I'm terrible. Like I think I just never developed the hand-eye coordination to be good, or like to like work a controller. I think that's definitely a skill, which is like learning a language. You're like much better at it as a kid than you are as an adult.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I'm also very bad at video games.
Yes, he is.
The only games I really can do is like racing games, but I have to play the course like 20 times until I know every curve, every obstacle and stuff. But I'm really very terrible. So when I play at events against people, some people ask me like, "Did you let me win?" I'm like, "No, I'm really that bad. You know."
Conversely, I'm really good at video games and have beaten his ass several times, and yet I wasn't a big gamer growing up. I was more of a, you know, I programmed stuff and played with that end of it, but I never actually played.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't have an excuse. I'm just bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, you said you played The Sims a lot.
Yeah.
I started with SimCity. You know.
Yeah,
That's how old I am. You know.
Yeah, I loved I still love sort of like simulation games like that because they did not rely on that dexterity and that hand-eye coordination. They just relied on thinking, and I still prefer games like that. And I'm still really terrible at like any game in which I have to move around 3D space with like a controller. I'm really terrible at those.
Did you torment your Sims like I did?
No,
Oh,
I'm the opposite type. There's like two types of Sims players, and I just let them have beautiful lives in beautiful
okay.
houses and like live out their dreams and like cater to their every wish. That was always me.
I'd build
Uh,
a room around them with just like a refrigerator so they could eat and no other amenities and just leave them in there and watch them get angrier and angrier.
and then die.
No, they never died. No, no, I'd make sure they couldn't die.
Oh God, that's even
I
worse.
know, I know.
Yeah, what many people don't know is, Little Computer People was actually
Oh
the
yeah.
grandfather of the Sims, and actually when Little Computer People was released in '85 at Activision, actually you can let the character die, and you would have to send the diskette back to Activision
Really?
so they can restore the character.
Wow.
Wild.
But around 12 years ago, they released a toolkit where you can generate your own character.
Wow.
Because of course nowadays Activision doesn't take your disc anymore. So if you kill your Little Computer
What?
People person, you can still play the game.
12 years ago they did this?
I think 12 years ago, 15
Activision
years
released
ago.
a thing so that people could to
No,
fix
no,
it.
no, it was fan made.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
Got it.
No,
That
it
would
was
be.
fan made. It was
I
fan
was gonna
made.
give props to Activision for
No,
sticking by.
no.
Yeah, no. That
But in 2007 they released their last C64 game, the Joerg, which was a role playing game they found in their archives, and they released it for free. So props to Activision for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Do not let it
Are they still, they
rot
still
in the
around?
dust.
Does Activision still exist?
Activision, sure, they
Oh,
are one
okay.
of the biggest
I
publishers.
don't know.
Activision Blizzard. That's
Oh, okay.
those.
yeah.
That's like the biggest thing. But yeah, you are right. In the history of Activision, they were bankrupt almost a couple of times.
Yeah, there's always you hear about the the video game companies and it's they've been absorbed by this and that and now it's just all Electronic
Right.
Arts or something and
No.
That's one of the reasons it can be really hard to kind of track down things to archive or like parts of video game history is because of all of those bankruptcies and mergers and acquisitions. It can be really, really hard to figure out even like who owns copyright for something or like who you should look for this or who you should credit or like who even has these things in their storage rooms. Like that's it can be incredibly difficult to track down, and that's why so much of what we see in video game museums is not the like in progress things, and not like in a lot of like art museums, you can go and you can see paintings that were half finished and you can see like what an artist's studio would have looked like. And like there's a bunch of Michelangelo sculptures that were like half finished that are displayed now. And you don't get that for video games. You don't get to see the iterations. And actually like the reason our museum exists was that our founder, Alex, he was at a flea market and he found a bundle of Atari cartridges, I think the 2600, for this game, Cabbage Patch Kids Adventures in the Park. And he bought it and he realized that each cartridge went like test iteration of the game in development. And this is not something you ever find for video games. And he had the kind of Indiana Jones, this belongs in a museum moment. And he made that museum. And that is the MADE. And and that's something like that we don't see. We don't get to see these like popular games in progress and like pull back the curtain. And that comes down to the fact that one, companies don't care, and two, companies don't exist. It's really, really hard to, even if you do have a company that still exists, like a Nintendo or any of the other big companies, like they're not going to tell you, like pull back the curtain for you. They're going to keep all of that very locked down. They're not going to want to talk about the past. And that's really sad.
So what do you think the reason is that some companies don't and others do, like Sega as a positive example? What do you think is the reason?
I don't know. I think it probably comes down to like, company philosophies and how they're viewing their past, and it could be everything from like one executive who cares about history and about preservation, or it can be the company ethos. I think it's a blend of things. And I think a company like Nintendo, not to slander their name, obviously, but a company like Nintendo, if their viewpoint is we don't care about the past, we keep moving forward, if like that's their stance they want to take, that's fine if that works for them, but they're going to apply that to everything. That's they're going to, if they view their history that way, then it doesn't matter if it's you asking about coming on the podcast or it's us asking about working with the museum, they're always going to take that stance. But at the same time, they do like work with museums, they do sponsor museums, but less about that like history past sort of stuff. Like the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle. And there's correlation there because Seattle has this where Nintendo is. And Nintendo does work with that museum quite a bit. And they have like video game exhibits at that museum, but that's much more focused on current things rather than the past. Right. So like the exhibition that is on at the Museum of Pop Culture that Nintendo sponsors is one that highlights actually indie games, but they're current indie games, and that's a lovely museum. That's a lovely exhibition. Like I really recommend people check out that museum because they're really awesome. But it's much more about current things that video game companies are interested in working with museums about rather than the past. And like we did, when we have partnered with video game companies, with Sega or with other ones, it has been much more focused on what they're currently doing rather than a desire to preserve the past. I think they see that as more of our job because we care about it oftentimes more than they do, which is a little sad to me.
Well, or to name another one is Konami. They actually gifted one of their arcade machines to the Flipper and Arcade Museum for Muslim only. So that was a nice surprise. Like, hey, we have this little arcade machine in our building hanging around, and we are not using it for anything. You want to have it? Like, so yeah. Well, it probably has to do with company policy and stuff, But I always I guess there is a saying: if you can't appreciate your past, you can't appreciate the future.
Right.
I don't know if I've got this saying saying correct. So I mean it will be always good to know, like, if there's another topic in the future, you can always go back and say, like, hey, could we talk to you again? But that means also, if something from those companies is lost or so, then you are totally depending on yourself to find a solution for a broken part or a missing, a missing data ship or whatever.
Yeah. And that's something that we're lucky to have such a great community of nerds that's part of the MADE. We end up like somebody will see like a broken something or other in our storage room, be like, hey, can I take that home and like play with it and like try to get it working? And it's like, sure. And they'll come back a few months later and be like, hey, I fixed this thing. And we're like, oh, right. Yeah, thanks. Awesome. Yeah. And that kind of relationship we have, and that I refer to as kind of our larger community, is one of the reasons a museum can exist. Like, when we found out that we were having to move, one of the things that we were most worried about was our arcade cabinets, because they're big and they're hard to move. Yeah, and so
tell me about it. When mine was taken away for repair, people thought I'm moving out.
Yeah, so it's really difficult, and so we literally were like, we don't know what we're gonna do. We don't know how we're gonna move these, and we made like 2 or 3 phone calls to people we knew that were like, you know, arcade collectors. And we straight up just said, hey, can you like be a foster parent like to this machine for like 2 years? And they're like, yeah, sure. Like I have space, just like throw it with the other ones. Like I'll come pick it up. And just like straight out of the goodness of their heart, like just willing to keep these machines just for a couple of years for nothing. And that I think it's our community, the community we've created, but it's also just people who are into, you know, old games in general. I think have that kind of spirit of like wanting to keep these things around and make sure that they're okay. And so that's something that's been really wonderful is, I mean, the community in general has just had like such a great response and been so supportive when they found out about us shutting down. But the fact that we have people to rely on, that when something breaks and, you know, it's not like we can call up Atari and say, hey, this, you know, 30-year-old console broke. You know, we have one of our guys who can come and fix it. So that makes the whole process of the museum much, much easier to run.
Yeah. Pivoting on that, that's a good segue, actually, because you just mentioned the support that you've gotten since you've been talking about moving out of the museum. What kind of support has come through from people?
Yeah, so we had that amazing video, the documentary made by NoClip, which it's been totally crazy here since that video was published, just like total outpouring of support.
We'll put a link to that somewhere down there so people can see.
Yeah, so we had, I think, at this point, over $10,000 in PayPal donations come to us out of nowhere. And we have, I think, almost 100 new patrons on our Patreon. That's been really crazy. And, you know, that's people purely donating because they care. Like our Patreon, because of the nature of the museum, doesn't really have that much to like offer to people, although just plugging the Patreon real quick, we're starting a podcast and that is going to be about game preservation and about the MADE, and so that will be just to our patrons on our Patreon, and like kind of behind the scenes thing. That's how our Patreon is working, but you know, the people who signed up were not promised any of that. They just did it out of the goodness of their heart. So it's been a lot of that, a lot of people talking about us on social media, like news articles about us. That's been really good. And a lot of people who work at game companies who have reached out and emailed and said like, hey, I'm going to, you know, tell my boss about you guys, and I'm going to talk about you guys to our like charitable giving department and that sort of stuff. And that really, really goes a long way for us because, you know, we've always been the sort of like word of mouth and community support. And it's been really nice to welcome so many people now into our community and get that kind of recognition. It feels really good.
Anyway, there's one thing that I wonder why this never happened in this pandemic is why isn't there like a tour all for the main museum,
like a virtual tour?
A virtual tour, yes.
Kind of like what we did with who was that we did that with?
The Digital Retro Park in Offenbach, Germany, yeah. And why don't you
because
connect
there isn't
to each
one
other
right now.
and saying like, well, I mean, not for the MADE. I mean, general. The idea would be like next week we have the Yandex Museum in Moscow, Russia. The other one we have the museum in Switzerland. The next week we have a museum in Germany. That would be a nice idea, you know, to have like a virtual tour throughout the computer and video game history from the standpoint of different countries, from different museums. But somehow this idea just came to my mind now.
Yeah, and you gave it away.
Yeah. Although,
what's wrong with you, man?
There's a lot of video game museums, and we don't really talk to each other that much. We do. One thing I found out about working at this museum is that the Germans really care about video games and video game preservation. That's something that I've definitely learned that was unexpected. And so like the museums in Germany we have more of a relationship with, but there's a lot of more video game museums than people think, and I would love to have more of a relationship with the other ones out there, but you know, I think all museums are struggling right now and going through it.
Definitely.
So that's something that I'd love in the future, is to kind of have more, because I think a lot of museums view others as a little bit of like competition, because, you know, there's only so many, you know, things that you can have in your collection, or there's only so much demand, but the museums are all pretty spread out. And so I think that, you know, I would love to have a stronger relationship with other video game museums out there, because they're all kind of having their different spin on it. Like, our whole thing from the beginning was that it should all be playable. That's like our guiding principle, that, you know, every design choice that we do is like, this is a museum to play the games. And it's a museum, it's not an arcade. And like that's a big difference too, that we have to clarify for people a lot, that like there is an educational purpose to this, and it's not just playing the games for fun, it's playing the games to appreciate them. So like those are our two, but some video game museums, you know, everything's behind glass, and it's much more a traditional museum experience of reading and learning, and that sort of a thing. And that works great for those museums. It's just kind of a different approach. But a video game is not like a painting. It's, you know, it's something like the average amount of time that somebody looks at a painting in an art museum is about 3 seconds. And I'm an art nerd, and so I think that's not enough time. But you can kind of get the gist of a painting in 3 seconds, apparently. But you can't with a video game. It's a time-based medium, you know, it's not purely visual, and we don't really think of it as a time-based medium like a movie is, because you don't have to like sit there for an hour. But, you know,
it's interactive
I think this varies. Sorry?
It's interactive storytelling.
Right, exactly. And the whole interactive part and the time commitment that you give to a video game is like something which makes it a very unique medium of art, compared to other things that are displayed in a museum. Is like you have to go in knowing that, you know, you're not going to get the same experience out of any video game that you could try. And like a video game like Animal Crossing is a really good example of a very time-based video game, because it is real time, and part of the joy in it is playing it every day. Right. And you could go to the MADE when it was open. You could go to the MADE and you could play Animal Crossing for, you know, the GameCube. You could even play the original, like, Japanese version on the N64, and it's awesome. But you don't really get much out of it, because you don't have that time. And, like, I mean, I guess if you wanted to come into the museum and sit and, like, play and come in every single day and play Animal Crossing every single day, you could. But the experience of going to museum if a video game museum is just inherently different than going to an art museum or even like a science museum, because of the nature of the thing that's exhibited.
Yeah. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. I like to think of games as more of kind of reverting back to the original way in which we told stories. You know, initially it was a, you know, a vocal tradition, you know, or an oral tradition, you know, where you're telling stories and people are interacting with the storyteller usually. Then somewhere along the line, the printing press came along and it made it just a static thing. You read it and you don't interact, and that's it. And that's where we've been kind of stuck for the last several hundred years, you know, is like this, or even longer than that, really. It's this is the story, there's no interaction. Or you're watching a movie and there's no interaction, or you're watching TV or listening to a radio play or something like that. And with games, you're getting back into that interactive bit where you're able to, you know, bug the storyteller and change maybe the outcome of the story and whatnot, you know, or you know, find a different way to get there, and that's pretty much it.
So as you mentioned, you are collecting donations and trying to find a new spot after your two years of stocking. What kind of location are you looking into? I mean, what would be the perfect location?
It depends who you ask.
I've got a garage over there. That's.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone listening just has a very large commercial space they happen to own and don't want, we'll take it. But I mean, for me, the ideal looks like, I think, very different than the ideal for other people. I mean, for our old museum was like one kind of main space where you could just walk around it and play every single, console ever made in order if you wanted to. And so I know that there's some people that want that kind of structure, that want like a big room with all the consoles and like that's it. There's an idea that some of us have about structuring it off into different rooms more, like you would in another museum, of kind of have that experience of wandering through rooms. But then the question becomes, how do you organize those rooms? And there's an idea I've been really liking lately that comes from one of our board members, Cassidy, and is to kind of divide things based off of where the console would have been in someone's house. So because eras, you had, ones that were in the like living room that everyone was playing together. These maybe earlier consoles that were meant to be like family entertainment devices that were in the living room.
Right.
And then you move on and you kind of have them in the teenager's bedroom or in the kid's bedroom. And then maybe you come back to the living room where you have and then you come back and you have the Wii, which was again meant to be a living room console. And then maybe you're having definitely when I was growing up, I remember having a computer room. Yeah. Our guest bedroom was also known as the computer room. And you had kind of that area of early computers and computer games that were in their separate room. And that's one way of thinking about it spatially, of almost walking through the rooms in a house. So currently, this idea might even change by the time this podcast is out, but currently that is my favorite idea, of having an experience of walking through the museum, almost like walking through a house, of kind of getting into that mindset of this is what it would have been like to play this console back as a kid in the 80s or in the 90s or whatever. And that sort of really pure experience, and even decorating it to look like it's from that era. That to me is my current favorite. That's my current ideal. But if you asked anybody else in our organization, they'd have a completely different idea. I'm sure there's people who want it to look like an art museum and have white walls and no cords visible and all of that. So it really depends who you ask.
I mean, it also depends. I mean, if you are coming to the year 89 and then okay, guys, now we are visiting the Game Boy era. Now we go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I love that.
No, that would be the today's era. That would be the modern era. The cell phone mobile game era is the bathroom. Actually,
well, the Game Boy era, what we do is have a car interior and have lights going by the headlights. Yes. And you'd only be able to play the game when you could see with the headlight.
Yes.
The street light.
Yes.
Yeah. I had this newbie light that was actually from America. You could put on top, and it had two bulbs in each corner, and that would glare on the screen and make it bright. And I got one last year. I was like, how did I play this on the screen with the bulbs next to it 20 years ago? I mean, you could barely see a thing, but as a little child, the glaring and the glaring from the light bulbs didn't disturb me, obviously, I still could make out the enemies.
When you said that, when you mentioned the only being able to play when the lights from the cars go by, my brain just froze, because I remembered oh my God, that's right. I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah, no backlight.
Yeah, there was I know there's no backlight, but I had forgotten about that actual experience of sitting in the car and not being able to play until street lights or whatever happens to light the screen. That was a thing.
I never had this problem. I never had this problem because my mother said you are not destroying your eyes.
Oh.
We are getting those newbie lights first thing. So I had it day 2 or something.
Oh, no.
because they were like. So I always had this comfort of not having this
My-
problem.
My parents my family was
Spoiled.
content to let me ruin my eyes, and look which one of us is wearing glasses.
Yeah, true. But I do it since I'm small, so it's fine. It's not because of that. Yeah, but hey, it's true. It's changed a little bit. The lifestyle having
Mm-hmm.
Imagine Game Boy was portable. Nowadays you would think like, wow, this was portable.
Yeah, no, that was because it was. I remember going camping with my grandparents and bringing my Game Boy along and being like, "This is amazing! I can play Mario in the woods."
Yeah.
For
It is a very interesting experience playing video games outdoors. I mean, because like I'll take my Switch sometimes to the park and go and sit and play outside, and like I'll be playing Animal Crossing and I'll be like in the park and I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
I'm
right.
really, like running around outside shaking trees. I could go shake a tree right now. Feels a little
Right.
wrong.
yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
So
Yeah,
where
well-
can people go to see what's going on with the MADE and to donate and to help out and to coordinate and all that?
Yeah, so our website is themade.org. And so everything is obviously, all the information is on our website. We also, as I mentioned, have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/themade. That is our name on everything. And we also have like our social media, like our Twitter is the most updated of our social medias. And that is basically it. Most of our donations are taken like through PayPal is fine. Again, Patreon. If anyone like is a corporation listening or has access to a corporation that wants to contact us about some like a bigger donation, that sort of stuff, they can always email us, just info@themade.org. Or if anyone listening wants to talk to us about anything, that's a great place to email us. We'd love to talk to you about, preserving video games. That is, I think, all the things I have to plug.
Okay.
Interesting that you mentioned info at the MADE, because the only thing I found was treasure at the MADE on your homepage.
You and other people who were emailing that address made me realize that info email address was not on our website. So it is on our website now, or it should be. But we just launched a new website. And so we're still kind of working out the issues with our website. And our website looks wonderful now. It is really beautiful and far better than our old website. But things like that I didn't realize that info email was not anywhere. Nobody would have known to email there. So hopefully now that email is on the website so people know that that's the one. The treasure one's fine too.
Goes directly to you or something.
Yeah, the treasure one goes to a handful of us. The info one also goes to a handful of us, but that's kind of how small organizations work.
Yeah.
Is whatever email address you email, it's probably going to be me who answers.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or like
nice.
Twitter DMs, like it's also all me.
Nice. Yeah,
Awesome.
Before we let you go,
Well, hang on. We'll put links to all of that in the podcast description so that people can click on it and whatnot.
Great. Well, thanks for taking the hour and talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
No problem. Well, it's for a good thing.
Yeah.
For a good thing.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to go to the MADE yet, and so we need to have it there so I can.
Yeah, well, you have time to plan out your trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going
First,
anywhere
we need
anytime
to
soon.
get rid of Corona.
Yeah.
And then let's see about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So thank you.
Yes,
Keep
thank
in
you.
touch.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.